Hi.
This is
Next book on the
Van
favorites
Degen.
list
Remember that
is
one
Paper
time when I
Towns
was
2. That's not all.
Say hi.
Hi. So I'm thinking I'm going to make this a thing. And by this I mean my book-loving incarnation and my movie-loving incarnation coming together to discuss general aspects of storytelling. You know, the videos where I make the paradox-defying decision to put on a hat and stand in front of the bookshelf background. I've made 2, possibly 3 videos like this, I can't remember, and they usually involve me talking about some aspect of storytelling that is universal to both books and movies and also other forms of media. So, it's a thing now. It's official. I have made it so. Now, what does this mean? Well, first of all, I'm going to be doing a little less of that. And also it means I'm going to be making a conscious decision every so often to actually talk about literature by putting on a hat and standing in front of the bookshelf background. There will probably be a playlist of these videos at some point, and there might even be a new intro. Because I'm obsessed with making new intros. And I really don't know why. But on with today's topic of discussion. So what is today's topic of discussion, you ask? Today we are going to talk about science fiction / fantasy. These are 2 genres that have kind of been schmoozed into one genre by bookstores and libraries and so on. You don't just read science fiction or just read fantasy, you read sci-fi fantasy. Now, to a certain extent, it does kind of make sense for these 2 genres to be put together, because they both deal with what we, at this time, perceive to be impossible. And there are quite a few books that kind of blur the boundaries, or even just eliminate the boundaries between sci-fi and fantasy. But despite the fact that the 2 genres are often put together, and despite the fact that the 2 genres are actually pretty similar, there are some pretty big differences between them. Science fiction, as its name implies, involves science. In other words, those elements of science fiction that we, at this time, perceive to be impossible are still grounded in scientific fact, or scientific theory. And so these stories are going to deal with things like extraterrestrials, which we've never seen and never encountered and never found any evidence of, but there's a pretty good possibility that they're out there. They'll deal with future technology and upgrades in technology and what technology is going to look like 10, 20, 50 years from now. Or they'll deal with the evolution of our society and where our society is going to be 10, 20, 50 years from now. So it's all based in fact, all based in things that we know to be true, or at least we're pretty sure we know to be true. So science fiction isn't so much dealing in the impossible as it's dealing in speculation. Fantasy? A little bit of a different story. Fantasy really does deal with things that are impossible, like magic or mythical beings and so on. Okay, let's not say impossible, let's not destroy the hopes and dreams of all those still hoping to get into Hogwarts. I don't mean impossible, I mean things that have been imagined by other people. Fantasy, there are really no rules. You don't have to be grounded in scientific fact or theory or any kind of fact and theory. You can just make things up as you go along. The rules in fantasy are those that either you make up or that you take from someone else who made them up. This all leads me to Jake Jarvie. Now Matt, you might be wondering, what does all this have to do with Jake Jarvie? And some of you might be wondering, who the F is Jake Jarvie? Jake Jarvie is the creator, writer, and director of the web series called Platoon of Power Squadron. And if you don't know what the Platoon of Power Squadron is, I suggest that you head over to the link in the doobly-doo or the link right here and right here and check them out. Lately, between his installments of Platoon of Power Squadron, Jake Jarvie has been sending out weekly updates where he asks his viewers a question. His question last week had to do with whether people preferred sci-fi movies or fantasy movies, I think. And one frequent answer that he said he was getting was that people prefer science fiction movies, but fantasy books. And I, as a person who does books versus movies reviews, thought, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because once again, science fiction is grounded in fact, and so the visual effects that you would have to use to portray the impossible elements of sci-fi stories are a little bit easier to do with the technology that we have. Because science fiction is speculation, it is a little bit easier to create a visual image of this speculation. Fantasy, however, is not speculation, it's imagination. And so therefore, the impossible elements of fantasy are always going to be more vivid in our imaginations. Which is why fantasy books work better than fantasy movies, because technology hasn't quite caught up with our imaginations yet. And I don't think it'll ever quite catch up with our imaginations. It'll always get really close, but our imaginations are limitless, and technology is not limitless. So what are your thoughts on this? Regardless of whether you actually like sci-fi fantasy or not, I realize that this video was kind of exclusive to people that like it, I'm sorry about that. But regardless, what do you think about everything that I just said? And that's all I have for you today. There will be a new favorite books review on Thursday, and I will see you then. Ta-ta! I have no idea why I was so hyperactive in this video. I really don't. I guess I'm just so excited to have a new thing on this channel.